think that they could have gone one of two ways. Way one was, let's play it safe. And way two was, let's just completely and totally entrust somebody to take this and make it their own.
The year is 1939. Batman was created in the early 1939 after a response to Superman was overwhelmingly positive. Batman first appeared in 1943 serial films, just titled Batman. These serial films are not what movies are today, but more like TV shows, where they were released weekly with a cliffhanger at the end of each, and you could only watch them in theaters. It wasn't until 1966 when Batman revolutionized cinema as we know it, becoming the first prominent comic book series character to get their own feature-length film, Batman the Movie. Batman's original intent was to draw in the comic book demographic, being lighthearted and more childish. Batman continued to be released in movies up into the 90s. Every Batman movie was a big success up until 1997. 1995 to 1997 with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. While both were commercial successes, critically they were both massive failures and looked to kill off the concept of Batman in a major motion picture altogether. While Batman the Movie was making superhero movies become the norm, our director was just starting off. Born in 1970, Christopher Nolan, growing up in both the UK and the US, loved the movies 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars. You can see this influence in Interstellar or Inception. Nolan started making films with his dad's Super 8 at the age of 7. It wasn't until 1998 when Nolan released his first film, Following. By this time, the superhero movie had cemented itself as a legitimate film genre, but was only still seen as nerd culture and not mainstream. Also in the late 90s, filmmakers like David Fincher started to become popular with their dark and gritty films like Fight Club and Seven. Christopher Nolan started to catch on to this trend and released his 2000 hit, Memento. Memento was the start of the Christopher Nolan style, while also taking elements of the gritty look of Fight Club. Meanwhile, superhero films started to become stale, using special effects, oversaturating the movie, and having a light and enjoyable tone. The early 2000s brought that to a grinding halt with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and, to an extent, The Incredibles. These movies brought superheroes to the forefront of the film industry, and what came next changed cinema as we know it. Following Memento and Insomnia's success, Christopher Nolan was brought in to do a Batman trilogy. This trilogy was going to break the mold of the entire superhero concept. Christopher Nolan famously said about Batman, "He's not a god, he's human." Batman had been forgotten in film for years now, and the 90s realistic dirty films were becoming popularized, making the Batman look to be much more of a grounded character. Some of you may argue that The Lord of the Rings or the original Star Wars trilogy are the greatest, but this is why I believe the Dark Knight trilogy is the greatest trilogy of all time. Batman never had a true origin story brought to the big screen until Christopher Nolan pitched the idea to Warner Brothers. He, being a relatively new director, had to have the perfect pitch to get this movie. The executive said, "If we're going to do it off any pitch, that is our guy," even though Christopher Nolan was not proven at the time. It would have been much safer to get a director who had worked with superhero movies before to guarantee a successful movie, but Warner Brothers decided to take the risk. Nolan never had the intention to make a sequel and wanted to make the best movie possible, leading off with a fantastic origin story. When starting the film, we get to see Bruce's original fear. We then cut to Bruce being in jail, which shows us that Bruce Wayne is a broken character with a few flaws. The opening scene after Bruce single-handedly beats 6 guys leads us immediately to Liam Neeson's character, Ra's al Ghul.
My name is merely Ducard, but I speak for Ra's al Ghul, a man greatly feared by the criminal underworld.
He introduces himself as a messenger for Ra's al Ghul, and this mysterious man is greatly feared by the criminal underworld. We find out later that Liam Neeson was in fact Ra's al Ghul all along. Ra's al Ghul knows Bruce more than Bruce knows himself. Bruce, after losing his parents at a young age and being locked up after leaving college, is searching for a path. He's searching for answers and a direction someone can show him. What Bruce needed to fill the void of his missing parents was a role model and mentor. Enter Ra's al Ghul, a man who comes literally from the shadows, mysteriously knows Bruce's main problem, has a perfect solution to that problem, and is a fill-in for his father figure that he so desperately has needed for years now. The path he offers to Bruce is one that Bruce agrees with, a hatred of evil, and wishes to serve true justice. We learn later that Bruce has had these ideals ingrained in him ever since he was a child from his parents being incredibly philanthropic, even to an extent that after his parents had died, Bruce still seeks revenge, wanting true justice. Bruce all this time has run from his issues, hides in the shadows and dirt, and sits with his problems trying to figure out a way to get through it. Ra's al Ghul is already in the cell Bruce is sent to, symbolizing he has entered this place before himself, and shows his poise and control of the situation, signaling to Bruce that there is a path out of this place, especially when Ra's al Ghul leaves willingly to symbolize an escape from this life. Also, Ra's al Ghul immediately summarizes Batman's character in one sentence, talking about a vigilante, which Bruce becomes after Ra's al Ghul's teaching, but unlike the League of Shadows, does not seek to destroy the very foundation, but instead root out corruption as Bruce sticks to his morals that his parents taught him. Before we see any sign of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, we start to hear Batman's theme played in the background as he journeys to Ra's al Ghul's temple, showing that Bruce Wayne has started the hero's journey and passed from the known world to the unknown world, starting his transformation into Batman.
What do you fear?
This lead-in into Bruce's continuation of the memory of the bats further reinforces his fear of the bats, but also is a reminder. The rule of threes, or sometimes referred to as setup and payoff, is very often in Nolan's films. The setup and payoff here is Bruce Wayne choosing to be Batman. His greatest fear was bats, and he's reminded of them constantly throughout the first and second acts. By reminding us again and again, it makes it obvious why Bruce chose to be the Batman as his symbol. And he tells us why he picked bats, because he wants others to have fear what he feared most. In this single scene, we are also shown the spearhead, which I will talk about later, as well as the phrase, "Why do we fall?" to pick ourselves back up. A phrase used throughout all three films, set up organically in the first act.
Your anger gives you great power, but if you let it, it will destroy you.
Without any planning for a second film, this line is better than I could have ever imagined. We need to jump forwards to the Dark Knight, because in the interrogation room, anger gives Bruce what he wanted over Joker, great power, but he didn't break his rule of not killing people, the rule Joker needed Batman to do. Because of his anger in the situation, it destroyed him because Rachel died. It caused Harvey to become insane, which led Bruce to murder Harvey and made Batman run and hide for years, destroying himself, his future, and Batman altogether. When we jump back in time to younger Bruce at his parents' murder trial, we see Bruce is a broken man pent up with anger and revenge. He has all the intentions to try and do what he believes will fix all his problems by killing the man who murdered his parents and ruined his life. That's taken away from him, and the resolution he believes he will receive, he doesn't get. This makes him frustrated still, and claims the system is broken because his problems are more important than others. These two scenes back to back are so well done because they show Bruce has not grown to be a man and has become what his parents never wanted him to be: selfish. Rachel realizes this too. She's done with his bitching and shows him that all the work his parents did to help the city is starting to go to the waste because Falcone, the man Bruce's parents' murder was going to testify against, has riddled the city with more problems. Rachel calls Bruce out on his shit and shows him that his perspective is skewed because his emotions are taking the best of him. Only when Rachel slaps him and tells him that his parents would be ashamed of him does he start to realize that what he thinks is right is the opposite of what his parents stood for and what he looked up to. When Bruce talks to Falcone, the central idea of the movie, fear, is constantly brought up. Falcone mentions it a few times, then Ra's al Ghul continues this talk of fear. What I love is that each villain takes on a different fear Bruce has. Falcone is the representation of fear of letting his parents down and losing Gotham. Ra's al Ghul helps him overcome his fear of bats, the unknown, the anger from losing his parents, and later, losing Gotham. Scarecrow tackles the fear of the unknown and losing Rachel. Each of these antagonists embody multiple fears Bruce has, and he takes on each one. They have overlap, but they are unique by what they bring. It is also time to point out the fact that Falcone and Ra's al Ghul both die or become insane, but Scarecrow survives, and the only fear that seeps into the movies is the fear of losing Rachel, because Scarecrow is the embodiment of the fear of losing Rachel, which, although he is defeated, he isn't apprehended, and thus symbolizing Bruce hasn't overcome this fear. I mean, I could rave about how well thought out these 3 movies were for not having 2 of them planned out beforehand. Liam Neeson says you must prove your commitment to justice by killing this man. Bruce won't do this because the reason he's here in the first place is because he would have done this to his parents' killer, but couldn't, so he got told off by Rachel. This led him to confront Falcone, who ran him out of town. Bruce got arrested because he was lost and needed a path that Ra's al Ghul showed him, and Bruce does not believe this justice because he realized that through Rachel, the justice isn't revenge, and this isn't right. Alfred asks why bats, and Bruce says he wants his enemies to share the same fear as him. In the next scene, it's not coincidence that the first man who Batman takes down goes into a literal unknown void of darkness. Not only are they fearing bats, but also the unknown. Batman makes them afraid of everything he fears. This leads to the midpoint of the movie where Falcone goes,
"What the hell are you?" "I'm Batman."
The shot of Bruce Wayne perched over Gotham is just perfect. It encapsulates the entire idea this one shot is trying to convey and shows the power shift dynamic in Gotham. I love how Bruce gets poisoned or whatever by Scarecrow and starts to hallucinate like the flower from Ra's al Ghul. He, unlike the other patients, don't panic but instead just get out of there because he's used to this. He wakes up and says he's felt these effects before, tipping us off that this could possibly have to do with Ra's al Ghul, even though he's dead to us. We found out later that he actually did survive, but it isn't unreasonable to believe this because they set it up for Ra's al Ghul to still be alive, just not exactly as they set it up originally. Ra's al Ghul's plan is so flawed, and it works perfectly because what he wants to take down, corruption, criminals, and just flat out bad people. And what does he use to take them down? Criminals in a corruption-filled city because of you. So what he wants to destroy, he uses as pawns in his game. This movie is constantly forgotten and overshadowed by its newer, more successful sequel, but don't sleep on Batman Begins. This movie isn't nearly as good as The Dark Knight, with the only parts I see lesser as Rachel, who I didn't feel was as compelling of an actress in this one. I didn't really believe her as much as I did in the one in Dark Knight. Not to say she did a bad job, but I always see this as my Rachel Dawes, because there seems to be more character to her representation of Rachel. It also could have gotten rid of the arrowhead. Like, it should have led to something, but just didn't. It, unlike the saying Rachel says to Bruce to have Bruce let her know he's Batman, is forgotten about and has no significance after the early second act. This had the setup and reminder, but the payoff is missing. They maybe had Rachel give him the spearhead for his birthday to be the payoff, but that's a nothing burger because it doesn't add any significance to the story. Lastly, I feel like this movie could have gone away with the evil boss owner too. I think that he's good for the business side of Bruce, but it just feels a bit convoluted with essentially 4 antagonists. This is my least important gripe because I like the dynamic that it led to him and Lucius Fox, but it felt a lot like a C-story in a TV show that isn't at the same levels as the other parts of the movie. Ra's al Ghul is slept on because he's followed up by Heath Ledger's Joker, but almost every line of dialogue I loved. Liam Neeson was perfect, and the writing for this entire movie was amazing. I wonder if people leaving the theater must have thought, man, that was a great movie. I bet they can't top that. This is one of the greatest movies ever made. I know some of you are expecting me to rave about this movie the most, but what can I possibly say about this movie that hasn't already been said? Batman, Joker, Harvey Dent, everyone. Everything is cast perfectly. So many great quotes, so many amazing shots. This section is most certainly the shortest because whatever I say is just recycled from the hundreds of videos about this nearly flawless movie. Funnily enough, the Joker's character wasn't expected to be this good because Heath Ledger had to follow up Jack Nicholson's Joker. Heath Ledger wasn't trying to replicate Nicholson's Joker, but remake the character to what he felt would be most true. Where Nicholson's was a former mob member who is clean in his dress and makeup, Ledger's is dirty, almost childish, and darker with his character background, and the movie as a whole being darker with his appearance. The introduction to Joker is so perfect. When first watching the movie, the way you learn about him is from stories the other criminals hear. They keep him menacing by hiding his identity, and you never truly know who he is or what he's like. The Dark Knight had one of the most aggressive marketing campaigns of all time.
We're joined tonight by District Attorney Harvey Dent, who has graciously taken time out of his busy schedule to not only answer my questions, but yours as well.
Enterprises came under the control of William Earl, who initiated the flotation of the company.
I'm calling to ask for your support. We all know what's wrong with Gotham. Crime is out of control.
After the first movie's success, they started to market the hell out of this one, and rightfully they did. The original actress for Rachel had scheduling issues, so they had to get Maggie Gyllenhaal to replace her. This is my Rachel. She just does the character justice to her more than Katie Holmes did.
Harvey, the last man that they appointed to protect the Republic was named Caesar, and he never gave up his power.
Alfred bringing breakfast to Batman parallels him in the first movie when he's tired and depressed in his house, and now is actively trying to make a difference. In this interaction, Alfred tells Bruce, "Know your limits," and Bruce responds saying, "Batman has no limits," with Alfred saying, "But you do, sir." This is not only a physical limit, which is tested, but a psychological limit. This movie focuses on Batman's internal struggle with his own morals when fighting the Joker, who actively tries to get Batman to break his own rules. When Alfred says, "Know your limits," he's only talking about the physical, which for the most part Bruce dealt with in the first movie, and almost feels invulnerable because he fought off the strongest villains and criminals with ease. But Bruce never truly has had a villain test his morals. What this movie thrives at is the little things. When Gordon and Harvey Dent are talking, the shot starts out wide, because you're having a casual conversation. As Harvey cuts to the chase and starts to talk about Batman, it slowly moves in on Gordon. As Harvey continues to press on Gordon's cops being investigated, it zooms in even more. The conversation is getting more personal and tense, and the camera movement and framing mirrors this claustrophobia with in-your-face comments. Another great scene is when they're at dinner together and Harvey's talking about Batman. When Harvey and Natasha talk about Bruce, instead of cutting to them, they keep the camera on Bruce because he's Batman, and he resonates with what Harvey's saying.
Whoever the Batman is, he doesn't want to do this for the rest of his life. How could he? Batman is looking for someone to take up his mantle.
There's a reason Natasha only gets one reaction shot and Bruce constantly is in frame. After this, we get to my favorite scene in this movie, the mob together meeting Joker. The Joker is finally introduced to us and the mob. We follow the Joker into the scene on a handheld camera because we're getting the Joker's perspective of the story. He starts off with the iconic,
How about a magic trick?
which not only introduces his lack of empathy when killing, but also his power in the situation. When the Joker sits down, he's on the other side of the table from Lau, the original man in power in the meeting, while everyone is off to the side. As Joker pinpoints Lau as the squealer, he hides like a pussy because he is truly afraid. One of the most accurate quotes of the entire movie is, "If you're good at something, never do it for free." The Joker is in control this whole time until Gamble calls him a freak.
You see, a guy like me. Freak. A guy like me. Look.
He starts to lose control of the conversation until he accurately identifies the problem and solution. The Joker is slowly taking back the conversation until Gamble loses his cool, so the Joker has to show him the grenades he's holding with the strings. Not only is the Joker pulling the metaphorical strings in this conversation, a direct comparison to the shot, but he is the strings, and all these mobsters are just one grenade that can all be detonated by Joker's unstableness. He is in control this entire time, except for when they attack him as a person, because that's the one thing he's never truly been accepted for. He was bullied about him being himself his whole life, and he isn't damaged by any physical hits, but the emotional ones that question him as a person truly get to him.
Half. You're crazy. I'm not. No, I'm not.
In the first movie, Bruce uses the eccentric life to hide from what he wants to be, and his true identity. In this movie, Bruce finally feels like he has accepted his mask of elaborate parties. He doesn't like this life, but he needs this to hide the fact that he's Batman. Hans Zimmer's score for this movie is so magnificent. When the Joker is telling a story about his scars, you constantly hear this increase in pitch.
So, me watching, he takes the knife to her, laughing while he does it.
It's just showing the tensions are rising in the scene as Joker is starting to lose control, telling a story about how he got his scars, and originally ended with Joker killing someone. So when the music starts playing again, with him holding Rachel, we assume the same will happen again because of the ascending pitch. but Batman comes in to stop Joker, which causes the Joker to lose control of the conversation, something he always thrives at and always wants. We finally see that this is the Joker's theme because it plays when he attempts to kill the mayor of the city. The Joker's theme is a build-up to the next impending death, or so it would seem, because again, what you first think is the theme is changed yet again. Joker's theme starts as only when he's in control with someone in his hands telling him about his scars. Then it molds into when Joker is in control of the situation and the counterpart has no power.
I just want to see her smile again.
Like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Some men just want to watch the world burn is the Joker in one line. Bruce can never truly understand this because every person he has ever faced always has a motive and a flaw. The Joker has no flaw. Nothing for Bruce to get an angle on. This is why the Joker is the perfect counterpart to Bruce, because the entire time he's been Batman, Bruce has always fought off people with his hands and knows not only to stop them without killing them, but that their motive is monetary or something he can solve. The Joker is the moral opposite of Bruce, being a much more difficult and memorable antagonist besides the fact that Heath Ledger just kills the role. Harvey's character is great, even if it isn't anything compared to the Joker. Harvey has this coin he always uses to decide his fate, which we later learn has heads on both sides. Harvey's trapped in a barrel room where it's about to explode, his face burns, and this symbolically represents him losing the better half, Rachel, but also his better half in his sanity and goodwill. Harvey's coin also burns on one half as Joker shows up in the hospital room. Harvey, like I said before, lost his sanity and started to listen to Joker. He doesn't think clearly ever since burning up and losing Rachel. He now hasn't left his life up to fake chance with both being heads. Harvey now has a true 50-50 chance of killing someone, which is almost exactly like the Joker's philosophy. He completes what he said in the first act. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Bruce decides that Harvey should die a hero, and people should never see Harvey as the villain, because he's a beacon of hope to these people. I talked about this movie a lot less because every single person who wants to get a film degree makes a video about The Dark Knight, so I decided to steer clear from this movie. I barely scratched the surface when it comes to the depth of this movie, but don't think that this is because this movie is inferior. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, and every single scene is amazing. Christopher Nolan perfectly encapsulates everything anyone would want from a superhero film, while still grounding it to make it more than just a superhero film. This movie is probably one of the more controversial. Some people absolutely despise this movie, while others adore this one. I am more towards the adore of this movie, but I can sympathize with those who despise this movie. For one, people really seem to dislike Bane's voice, and I mean at points his voice doesn't really fit the tone of the scene, which can be a bit off-putting, but if you could move past this, Bane is a very good follow-up to the Joker. The difficulty this movie faced was going up against the aforementioned Dark Knight and the Joker. The Joker was iconic with his psychological destruction of Batman and society as a whole. The first movie in this trilogy focused on its attention to the physical limitations of Batman, while Joker was more focused on the mental side. Bane is a great follow-up because he's a combination of both of these things. He's one of the followers of Ra's al Ghul and thus is psychologically at odds with Batman. In Batman Begins, Bruce didn't have to worry about this aspect because he outsmarted and outwilled Ra's al Ghul to where he defeated not his ideological differences, but instead through fighting. Bane in this movie is stronger, smarter, and ideologically at odds with Bruce while having the resources to fulfill his and Ra's al Ghul's plan. Now let's get into the actual film. The introduction to Bane, although not as menacing as the Joker's intro, is an incredible way to show him, his intelligence, his theme, and his ideology. Comparisons to the Joker will be kept to a minimum, but when people watch this movie, they compare Bane to Joker because he's the one that followed him. I expect the next big Marvel villain to be compared to Thanos, which will be very difficult to follow up.
It needs correction.
You don't know that!
I'm the only one who knows that.
We also get a staple of Christopher Nolan's films, realistic sets for nearly improbable stunts. In this intro, we see Bane's intelligence with this plan, and learn about his ideology by having someone sacrifice themselves for the greater good.
No! They expect one of us in the wreckage, brother.
Have we started the fire?
Yes.
We'll come back to Bane's ideology later. I think a big problem with this movie has to be Commissioner Gordon's character. While Jim Gordon wants to tell the truth about Harvey, he's unsure whether he should let them know the truth. We learn from these two nobodies that Commissioner Gordon is going to be fired and that his wife took the kids. I understand why she left, because maybe she didn't handle the pressure and the threats to her family, but I think the way they said this feels like the actress was fired, just like Megan Fox from Transformers, and they decided to write her off in one sentence and give reasoning for Jim Gordon being available to fight back against Bane. We also never get a reason why the mayor is going to fire him, because there has been so much time in between. He saved the city in the last film, and now is seen as a bad commissioner with no explanation besides it's peacetime? Both of these things can only be speculated on because the film never tells us. I get he isn't a main character, so his backstory is probably pointless, but I'd fire back with the fact that he's been integral to the story for all three films, and this one, he's given no respect. In this movie, he's one of the most major characters, and he doesn't get anything to show us what happened with his family, why he's been a bad commissioner, or anything, even though he's a very important character to this movie and trilogy. So let's forget about that tangent and focus on Catwoman for a second. Anne Hathaway is fantastic in this movie. She is magnificently charming, cunning, and incredibly sly. She has a great introduction to her character right away with Bruce, and only when Bruce catches on to her does her score kick in, and we can see in her body language and tone of voice that she isn't this innocent girl from the first shot, but instead this intelligent criminal who is underestimated constantly so she can take advantage of others.
Oops.
Batman also in this movie is fantastically written. He's a complete mess, walking it with a cane, having a disgusting facial hair, and not leaving the house for years on end. After losing Rachel and saving Gotham to a point where they don't need the Batman and are actively hunting him, Bruce is a lost soul with no purpose and no point in living. My other, slightly smaller problem is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, Robin. He feels very forced, like the studio stepped in when they were in production of the third film and they decided they wanted to continue the films by adding Robin in this one. Where Catwoman feels authentic and genuine, Robin feels forced and unnecessary. Robin is a young cop who has a very close relationship, but is never really shown except for one scene, with Commissioner Gordon, who he cares deeply about. He also cares deeply about Batman because he lived in a home and Batman was a beacon of hope. He knows a lot about Batman for some reason, which I think the entire city should realize that Batman has disappeared at the exact same time Bruce Wayne basically left, but I guess they are all dumb. Robin is this hothead cop who doesn't play by the rules and shows that the people in power aren't perfect, and breaking the rules to do what they think is right is ultimately best for everyone. I wouldn't be surprised if I heard that Mark Wahlberg auditioned for this role, because this is every Mark Wahlberg character ever, minus the Boston accent.
Your car? Huh?
This is where I need to talk about the major problem in this movie that pops up from time to time in Nolan films.
And you brought him down here.
We didn't know what to do.
It was a long time ago. I was a kid. St. Swithin's used to be funded by the Wayne Foundation. It's an orphan.
Evil rising from where we tried to bury it. The Batman has to come back.
Once you've done what you had to, they'll never let you do what you want to.
Start fresh.
There's no fresh start in today's world.
Where is it?
The clean slate? Where you type in someone's name, date of birth, in a few minutes they're gone from every database on Earth.
Yeah, so this film has an exposition problem. Thomas Flight made an excellent video about Tenet's exposition problem and says that Nolan films, for the most part, use exposition heavily to convey the plot and backstory for his characters. There is nothing inherently wrong with this, and exposition for the most part is important, and sometimes movies can be almost all dialogue. The problem with exposition is when they over-explain, overuse, and bore the audience. In The Dark Knight Rises, we have 2 short action scenes and 30 minutes of backstory for side characters. Backstory for why Bruce won't leave. Pigeonholed explanations for why Robin matters. Backstory for Catwoman, even though we could have lived with the fact that she's this mysterious burglar, and so on. This movie lacks to do what the other films do, and that is get the hell on. Intro films like Batman Begins, where they set up the world and explain everything up to that point, makes more sense to have exposition. But when you are in the third film of a large franchise, words do not matter to the masses. People are here to see Batman defeat the villain, and have a memorable villain at that. Nolan spends too much time giving his side characters setups to try and make Bruce want to go and be Batman again. But he has more than enough motivation when he hears that Commissioner Gordon is shot and sees an underground city that is run by a mercenary. Nolan has this problem in movies like Interstellar and Tenet because he believes he has to overcompensate the difficult concepts with loads of explanations. But The Dark Knight Rises is one movie that makes no sense to have this much talking about setup for a movie that follows two that did a good job setting up for this one already. Even with the flaws that make it seem like I hate this movie, there are some truly great things about this movie. Some of these include the amazing score.
Of course not.
Catwoman.
Look, you wouldn't beat up a woman any more than I would beat up a cripple.
Bane.
Do you feel in charge?
Catwoman.
You gotta be kidding me.
No guns, no killing.
Where's the fun in that?
The Cave Prison. Alfred. Catwoman. Can we just talk about Anne Hathaway and put her in every goddamn movie? She is amazing. Alfred has been great in every movie, and in this one, he's more than just a way to explain the plot. Although, he still does that. For once, Alfred is here to deliver the emotion and give Bruce more motivation to be Batman. Bane in this movie is truly powerful from the first scene. Where the Joker looks to be menacing with his unhinged persona and dirty look, Bane is powerful in every scene and always in control. One line I love, that I hate, that became a meme.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it.
Batman's entire existence, he has used darkness as a strength because people are afraid of the unknown, which in this case is the darkness. Bane is the antithesis of Batman because he is not only not afraid of it or weakened by the light, but instead weakens Batman. Bane beats Batman to a pulp and cracks his mask, completely breaking Bruce both physically and mentally. This is why Bane is the ultimate antagonist to Batman, because he encompasses the previous villain's strengths into one character, but adds to it to show that Batman is not invincible. When we get into the cave, we finally get the backstory for Bane's theme. When we see Bane or his men doing something on screen, we get this chant repeated, and now we see the actual chanting on screen. The men in the cave chanted this to the people attempting to escape from the jail to encourage them. This is Bane's theme because up until the end, we believe Bane was the child who escaped, and this is almost his theme song. This chant says rise. Bane rises from the darkness to take on Bruce, and Bruce has to do the same exact thing to rise from the darkness into the light to take on Bane. He's down there because he's at his lowest point. He's completely defeated. Batman is destroyed, and he is at the lowest point, a literal dark hole in the earth. When Bruce makes his way out, it's just a score with no words. It starts with only Bane's theme, but soon Batman's theme goes over top of it when he finally makes a jump. Bane's theme disappears and Batman's theme takes over. This is the musical equivalent of saying, Batman's gonna fuck some shit up. If I had to boil down this movie's plots, it's that the rich and powerful need to be overthrown because they never truly know what the poor have to go through. Well, the bad rich people need to be overthrown, while the good rich people should be kept in power and the bad poor people should stay in their place while helping the good poor people. And the government and the police are filled with liars and the corrupt that must be overthrown, but they aren't actually that bad because they keep order, so it's fine, I guess. It's complicated. So let's look at Bane and Ra's al Ghul's ideology, but first we need to take a look at Marxism as it pertains to film theory. Now before you groan and skip ahead, let me first explain myself. When people think of Marxism, their original thought process goes to communism, which in the Western world is associated with Stalin, Communist China, and many other regimes that take advantage of their people and kill millions of innocent people. Marxism, in the most broad sense, was just a response to the modernizing capitalistic world where Karl Marx believed the world would ultimately just result in communism, where people would own the means of production instead of the world having the top 1% benefit. When we go back to Bane and Ra's al Ghul's plan, their intent is to give the power back to the people, or so they claim. Bane wants to watch the city eat itself alive as they are given false hope of surviving, when in reality, Bane and the League of Shadows know that they will all perish. Bane does this because they believe these people are beyond saving, just like Ra's al Ghul said, because they believed to be the lowest of the lows. All forms of government, currency, societal structure are turned on its head to give the power to the people. We later learn that this is a front for destroying Gotham because the people are beyond saving, according to Bane and Ra's al Ghul. Bruce ultimately proves them otherwise by saving everyone, but Bane's way of getting power to everyone was giving power to those who were down on their luck and poor. By using these people who are criminals, crooks, and everything Scarecrow is, you can see why Bane believes these people are beyond saving. These people are savages that don't care about the wealthy because the wealthy were horrible to them. So when we look at the undertones of communism in this movie, we don't see it as this thriving society, but instead a horrible future where the rich are alienated and killed while the poor have zero sympathy. Hey guys, I was editing this and I realized that this didn't come off very clear, so I'm gonna just say this now. I get that communism in the realist sense is to give the means of production to the people, and in this film there really isn't a means of production because there's nothing being produced, but the societal structure and hierarchy are designed around Marxist beliefs. And even if it isn't communism or socialism, I still viewed it that way. And this really isn't totalitarianism, because Bane, although he is seen as their higher up, he really isn't leading the people. They're doing everything themselves. They're just backing him. So it's not really totalitarianism, it's not communism, it's not socialism. I just read it as communism. I just wanted to make that clear. Bane's point is proven through these people because they are becoming savages. This film is essentially saying communism bad, Bruce and capitalism good. And this is not to say communism is good, nor Christopher Nolan is wrong, nor am I here to shit on capitalism. I'm here just to look at this logically with a Marxist lens. We could look at authorial intent, but that doesn't matter, because what Nolan intended and what the audience reads could be possibly two very different things. What I read is communist undertones in Bane's execution of his plan, and Nolan may have never intended this, but the fact of the matter is that this is what I got out of this. Now, I understand that Bane is saying that martial law is instilled, which makes this point a little irrelevant. But the courtroom where they decide the fate with no due process to kill off all of the quote-unquote corrupt rich people is insanity we see in communist regimes like Soviet Russia and China. Oh, China. How forgotten about you are because you supplied cheap shit to the Western world.
Now, women in China's so-called re-education camps have been systematically raped and tortured.
They live in a police state, where they're monitored by one of the most advanced and intrusive surveillance systems in the world.
When Bane hastily judges the entire city off of the worst, it makes sense why he believes that Gotham is beyond saving, because these people are proving to him that they are. Even in the darkest of times for all of Gotham, they will always have a capitalistic beacon of hope to save them in Batman. It makes sense a film intending to make money to favor capitalism. Some entire TV shows and movies are only intended to be massive commercials, of which they sell merchandise.
You are either lying or you're stupid! I'm stupid!
So of course, Batman, a marketable brand, would defend capitalism and the city from this because that is how the studio makes profits. Again, I just want to reiterate, this is not defending communism, nor is it shitting on capitalism or Nolan. This is just looking at this with the Marxist lens. Now, is Dark Knight Rises perfect? No, not by a long shot. But it has some amazing moments, even with the flaws. It has nothing on Dark Knight or Batman Begins. but it did do an amazing job at making the villain truly powerful and was a major step up in that regard. Probably talked about this one the most because of the ups and downs in the movie, but the amount of flack this movie gets is so unwarranted. Bane is not the problem, nor will he ever be. He's the scapegoat for this movie's flaws, but he's not the problem.
And do you accept this man's resignation? And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars?
People could have targeted the exposition problems, the disrespect to Jim Gordon, or Robin's pigeonholed story, but instead people decide to say Bane's voice is the problem, which, like, come on. You couldn't have found another problem that was at all relevant to the plot instead of the way Tom Hardy decides to take the character, which I really enjoyed.
And we give it back to you, the people.
I was recently rewatching Casey Neistat videos, and I stumbled on this video about the GoPro Gen 9. The video is classic Casey Neistat, having great videos as always. As I was watching, I was struck by one thing he said. It wasn't about the specs or the camera, it was something more profound.
But whether or not you need to shell out the $450 to get it is entirely up to whether or not there's a marketplace for excellent when the world is saturated with good enough.
Now this got me thinking, not about the camera, but film as a whole, because today, more than ever, the world is filled to the brim with mediocre films that are just passable. Rarely when you hear someone watch a movie do you hear, yeah, it was awful. I feel like I always hear, yeah, it was good, I enjoyed it. In a world of pretty good, what's the need for excellent? This is not to say Casey is wrong, because in this instant he's 100% right. But I feel the majority of the population is satisfied with the Lion King remakes and Frozen 2s of the world. Even with the flaws these Batman movies have, they're nowhere near the mediocrity we get today. I see Batman as the greatest trilogy of all time, but you could easily argue for Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, or any number of other trilogies. These mediocre films that do phenomenally in the box office get by with the mediocrity because what's the point of going to the unknown of the La La Lands or Moonlights of the world?
Relax. I got you, I promise. I'm not gonna let you go.
In a world filled with mediocrity, what's the need for excellence if everyone is generally satisfied with tolerable?
On TV!
Thank you guys for watching. This one took a long time. I was pushing around the idea for 3 months and I just decided to start working on it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think of this trilogy. Let me know if you like any other trilogies or whether you think I'm wrong about this one. I'd really like to see that in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next one.